Welcome to the Staff in Trenchcoat. I'm Raymond Magdallan, here as always with my co-host Pope Jupiter.
Hello.
Today we are covering Pure Power by Nicholas Woode-Smith. And I think I'll just throw it at you right off the bat. Why did you hate it? And why should nobody bother to go ahead and read it?
I wouldn't say I hated this book, but yeah, I guess I'm 0 for 2 now for the last two of my selections. This one, actually, I'm 0 for 3, aren't I? I had Magic Bites for Love of Magic in this.
Yeah, it's been a rough time for you. I feel like at this point the scales are maybe equaling out
Yeah, for
at
sure.
this
For
point. So if you
sure.
continue to pick duds, then the staff will take the lead, as it were.
Yep. But yeah, so this book was very cliche, and the ending was. We'll get into spoilers later, but what a. An insult?
Yeah, it was borderline offensive.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, if there is a time where you would say that it was where it's a reasonable critique to say the writing at the end of the story seemed like it was calling me stupid. This, I think, qualifies for that. I felt like I was being written down to.
yeah. And the mechanic for fighting the demons was interesting, um, but it the way it was explained was that you we'll say this when we get into the magic system, because this is less about why, because the whole thing was just ass pull after Deus Ex after dumb world thing.
Yeah, there was a strange cadence of, as you said, kind of cliches and writing no-nos, as it were, that just kind of repeated itself 3 or 4 times, and then the novel's mercifully short length was elapsed.
Yeah.
I found that the first couple chapters were they were cliched in terms of the writing style and so on and so forth, but enjoyable. And then it kind of set in about 25% of the way through that this is not going to be a book that I'm going to enjoy. And I guess it makes sense to start saying at the beginning of these episodes we recommend that you read the book before you listen to the discussion. So if you're on the fence about whether or not you're going to read the book when you start an episode, grab it. Or in this case, maybe don't. But we're not going to do a full, narrative structure and scene by scene summary.
We assume you have some familiarity with the book, and when we refer to different scenes, we assume that you know what we're referring to.
Right.
Although in the very first episode, we talked about how sometimes you like to watch videos about trash things and listen to people talk about why they're trash. And no judgment.
Although I feel like we've gotten to where we're about 50%. It seems like about every other book. At some point, there must have been 2 duds in a row that kind of switched our, the way that our leaderboard was shaping up.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I feel like about half of the books that we've read are ones that I think are very good, that I would recommend to anybody. And then maybe half of the ones that are not as good are still like worth picking up, either because they're short or they're cheap or they have some redeeming quality. It's really only been, I think, maybe 2 or 3, because I would say we don't even have to wait till the very end. This is right up there with Knight Errant and was it Magic Bites that were the worst of the bunch?
I think ultimately for Love of Magic, or for Love and Magic. No, it's for Love of Magic. Whatever. That book was so bad and forgettable that I don't even remember the name of it. I think that one was probably that one and this one were probably the nadir
Yeah.
with
So
Way of
yeah,
Kings
right.
in there somewhere too. So
Yeah, all right. So maybe it is just more straight down the middle. Like half of them are yes recommend and half of them have been bad. But
yeah,
in any event, I think that even the books that are bad are still worth the discussion, and at least from a sales perspective, I think only Knight Errant is what I would call like truly a small time. Well, but even Knight Errant, I guess he had a publishing company,
yeah,
or the team did. I think maybe was it Lona Andrews? Which book was she?
that was Magic Bites.
Okay, I think that
But
was straight up self published.
no.
No.
Alona Andrews is a force in the urban fantasy. She's been
Okay.
going for like 20 years.
Then maybe I'm thinking of the Kate Daniels.
That is Alona Andrews.
Shit.
Um, yeah, most of.
So we really haven't done any just straight up self-published low sales. I mean,
I think this might be the closest to like a small indie writer.
indie. That was the word that I was.
Yeah, because I
was
came
escaping me.
across the author on Reddit.
Okay.
Like I was on r/urban fantasy looking for Rex, and the author had posted to Reddit, "Hey, I'm making my book 99 cents for a limited time because the third book is coming out in this trilogy."
Well, I missed that train. I paid the full price, whatever it was.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get it as part of Kindle Unlimited, so I think, or maybe I paid for it. I don't remember. It doesn't matter.
Well, on Kindle Unlimited is pretty good about. I think they have a much more. Fair isn't the right word, but it's the one I'll use. A fair interval between when they'll actually offer you a free month or a very cheap month. Like Audible, they're pretty hardcore about if you've done a free trial, like you have to wait. I don't know if it's a year or 2 years or something, but I feel like in the last maybe one calendar year, I've gotten at least 1 or 2 months free, and then maybe as many as 4 or 5 months where it was $1 or something like that. So I mean, I for the reader who does not have a huge disposable income, I think that's a huge resource.
Yeah.
Particularly if you enjoy, as we're talking about here, smaller company published work or indies or whatever. In any event, the point of that derailment was just to make sure that when people pop into the show that they're not expecting us to recap the entire thing, because we are going to kind of talk as though you just read the book. Anyway.
Do you just want to rant for a little bit about your mad?
Yeah. Yeah, this is our new segment, Magdallen's Mad. So I came to the conclusion that I need to stop using the caveat of, like, well, I'm brand new to the genre. Because I don't know what the number is, but I feel like now I've read enough of them that I can make...
This is what, our 8th, 9th episode?
I think this might be 10.
10?
Yeah.
No, it's... Wait, would I have the even one? Yeah, I would have the even one.
Yeah, it's 10.
So yeah, the episode 10. So yeah, you've read 5 urban fantasy books?
Well, I think I might have picked one along the way as well, and then when you add that to the scholarly work that I've read on the topic, as well as the books that I had read previously, certainly I now feel like I've read enough to be able to have a grasp on some generalities that are more reliable than they would have been before we did this project. So having said that, the genre is, as far as I can tell, plagued with bad dialogue. The dialogue is almost always, to my eye, several levels below the rest of the prose. Like, it's noticeably worse than the rest of the novel, almost to the point where you feel like somebody else is writing the dialogue. And I'm not entirely sure how much of that is a convention of the genre that authors are, to some degree, doing on purpose, i.e., if I was a filmmaker and I wanted to make a cheesy Western, there are some technically poor dialogue choices that I would intentionally make to accentuate the the cheese that I'm trying to produce.
I
But
wonder how much of that is Buffy speak. Um, Joss Whedon is a huge influence on nerd culture because he wrote for Buffy, he wrote for Angel, and he wrote Firefly, Serenity, um, and I mean for a long time he was the feminist nerd of Hollywood, and then we found out how many women he'd been sexually harassing for years. But he has a very distinctive dialogue style. And it is a very polarizing dialogue style. It's that witty, pseudo witty, fast back and forth type of dialogue style. Like if you ever watched Buffy or the first Avengers movie was written by Joss Whedon. That kind of dialogue style. And I wonder if it's just people trying to emulate that kind of thing and not being able to, because you do need to have a certain amount of wit and verbal dexterity to carry off that kind of dialogue. I mean, personally, I do kind of like Buffy speak Whedon's dialogue, but it's not something that can be done well easily.
yeah, and I guess the point I'm making is if people can jump into the comments if they want. I'm not sure what you would say how many novels you need to read before you can start to make a judgment about whether a thing is just a convention of a genre that you don't like, or whether you have read enough that you can begin to decide whether or not it is doing that convention well. I feel like I'm at the precipice, at least, of being able to make that distinction. And in this case, and in several of the other cases that we have read, I feel like they fail to do the convention well. And the dialogue, it just does a lot of things that I think are kind of obviously bad in a non, a genre agnostic
Right.
way. The characters say things that are obvious
Yeah.
in a way that is not necessary. A character will say something, and then the narrator will immediately describe the thing that they said. Look, so and so said, a ship is coming over the horizon, and then over the horizon came a ship, and it's clunky. You do one or the other.
Yeah.
And then the syntax of the dialogue, as you said, I do get the impression that what is being attempted often is what would you say, a witty repartee.
Mm-hmm.
And they're willing to do it even if I know from the rest of the text that the author is a sophisticated enough thinker to know that they're not doing it well. But for the style that they're going for, they're willing for it to be B-, C+ dialogue,
Right.
because they just can't think of anything better.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's I wouldn't make the claim that I'm a master of dialogue or an expert of dialogue, but it is something that I've studied extensively, written about, and that I try and have a focus on. And when people, students, so on and so forth, have approached me for extra help, it is normally about their dialogue. So it's a thing that I've dealt with a lot in the classroom and in my own writing. And the way that I tend to conceptualize it is maybe not for the entire time I'm writing, but if I'm writing dialogue specifically, I am always imagining in the scene in the sense of if I was filming a movie.
Right.
And if the characters are on screen and they said the things that I'm now going to write to each other, would it be believable to me as an audience member? And very often I'm finding that the urban fantasy dialogue does not pass that test. When I try and imagine the characters actually saying these things to each other with a straight face,
Right.
you would imagine that the movie would get very bad reviews. And I could go on, I won't. This book's dialogue, I thought, was not the worst. I think the worst that we've had was For Love of Magic.
Yeah. I was gonna say that book was trying so hard for the Buffy speak and just failing at every turn.
Yeah, and at least in this case, there is not directly the character isn't just literally saying, and then I beat the guy up because I'm a badass.
Right.
But still, the difference between the sophistication level of the writing and the general narration, the paragraph to paragraph syntax, versus the dialogue, there was still a huge disparity of quality, I think. Enough that it was noticeable to me and that it was jarring. And then the other thing is, as we just kind of went over, none of these books have come from just a pure self-published endeavor.
Right.
And yet the editing is consistently poor. And it gets worse as the story goes on, to the point where towards the end, I think I identified as many as 4 or 5 just like blatant typos. And that, for me, that's really rough. I think even like the Lord of the Rings and stuff has 1 or 2 errors in it that I don't know if they have, expunged them over time.
Right.
But I don't mean that, there's a 1 letter difference, or, the printing is goofed up and so one of the letters doesn't get fully printed or something like that. I'm talking straight up like the sentence is wrong. And it's obvious.
Yeah, on the subject of dialogue, I forgot that I had actually highlighted some stuff since I actually read the book instead of listening to it.
That's right, yeah.
So, burgers. I don't know why I always picture DJ Gibbs with some sort of Commonwealth accent.
Well, I think she must be Australian, right? Because she uses the Australian construction of they say a thing and then they use the word hey as an intensifier.
Well, it takes place in South Africa.
Okay.
So it would make sense for there to be some, like I said, Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, England,
gotcha.
Whatever. But DJ Gibbs, the monster hunter DJ that doesn't
we'll
get explained.
There. We'll fucking get there.
We'll get there. So, Baggers, DJ Gibbs suggested, you want burgers after all this? I asked, aghast. Which, that's to go to your point, every single editor would say you do not need aghast.
No, and you can't just say aghast.
Yeah.
It's like that meme that I read you the other day, that person that wrote that essay for college where he would have a sentence and then a period and then just the word perchance.
Right. But aghast. He shrugged. Always. We scaled the slope up to the parking lot where some sanitation guys were chatting. Oi, chick! One of them called. And that's the part that Oi, chick!
Yeah, what is that?
What the fuck kind of catcall is that?
And again, is it possible that something like that has been uttered? Yes, but I've never heard that before. Is that a local dialect thing? Maybe. I mean, oi certainly is.
Right.
But, and also that the catcall construction was recycled in the novel.
Yeah.
They used it a couple of times. Very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have another one?
The only other stuff I have is, let's see, here it is. Oh yeah, this is more about the sort of the non-dialogue monologue, the stuff that Cindy says as part of the narration. This is, let's see, chapter, it's near the end of the book, chapter 26.
Because it's in first person, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing I want to talk about.
When she chased after a rat, inevitably it disappeared through a hole in the wall. I sighed. What was I expecting? Probably was just a rat. I turned around and then stopped. I heard scampering, scratching, squeaking, scurrying. A lot of S words.
Well, I isn't the term for that alliteration?
That's in the text. A lot of S words.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so again, that is an example of the author trying to be clever.
Yeah,
Because if it had been like a really beautiful, I hope I'm using the word alliteration right here.
as far as I know, you are.
If it had been really lovely or more poignant or more grandiosely executed, I could see that exact line maybe carrying some weight, but that was a pretty piecemeal.
Yeah,
Uh, but I mean, that's a thing that I love doing that in my writing. It's
yeah,
fun to play with words like that. But
yeah. The
breaking the fourth wall
alliteration
there,
is amazing.
yeah,
It's a lot of S words.
she hadn't earned that.
Yeah, no.
Uh, but real quickly, adding on to the Magdallen's Mad segment, um, I feel like the first person is a very difficult skill in novel form to get right. And it seems like that's another complaint that I guess I have with the genre is that these writers do not seem like they have the chops to execute long form first person narrative.
Can you elaborate on why it's more difficult to do first person over third person?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it. It's sort of
Sure.
a truism. Uh, you just have a lot more latitude with an omniscient narrator, and you're able to fill a lot more space with intriguing descriptions, and you don't have to rely on the I thought, I said, I went construction.
I see. So by having a first person perspective, you necessarily limit what can be on screen on the narrative.
That's true as well, yes. And so in most high fantasy, you're getting multiple points of view
Right.
throughout the text, and that's one way that's one reason that high fantasy books tend to bloat to
Right.
astronomical heights. But and I think that uh, the biggest pitfall with first person narrative seems to be the tendency to have wacky pacing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to talk about pacing later on. But
Yeah.
so that dialogue bad, first person narrative maybe too hard, editing not as good as it should be, particularly later in the text.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the three reasons today that Magdown is mad.
Yes.
And so, does it fuck?
No. This is one of these more one of the most sexless books we've read. Um,
No, I would say it is the sexlessest,
yes.
the least sexy.
Um,
Even at least in Way of Kings, I was bricking up thinking about the safe hand. You know what I
right.
mean?
There were hints of some kind of debaucherousness happening. But this is basically like a nun leaves the convent and hooks up with an adventuring crew, and then that's just as dry as you'd expect.
Yep.
Apparently, this and we'll talk about this later. This series, this is the first in the Cindy Giles trilogy, and it is a prequel trilogy to the author's other series, the um, Catverse is what it is, what it's called. It's another character, and this Cindy Giles is apparently a character in that series. So I describe this as the Better Call Saul effect, where there's a bunch of characters, a bunch of things in the world who are probably important to people who have read those books, but they're just kind of put on this page here for us to, for those of us who haven't read the books, to be like, who the fuck is that? But there's kind of this, and I wonder if this gets paid off, because there's a hint when Cindy first meets Tom, that her blush is related to his heat. And I don't know if I'm just reading too much into it, which I probably am,
I think you are.
uh, or if they were trying to go with like she was responding to his power or whatever. But I'm probably just reading too much into it. It was just he turned down the heat, so she was less literally temperature-wise warm, high, and that's why she stopped blushing as much in that particular scene.
Well, it was this, very. I wouldn't even use the word juvenile to talk about if you want to call it a romance element. It was childish.
Yeah.
It was absolutely sterile.
I'm gonna take a guess that Cindy and Tom are some sort of power couple or what have you in the Catverse. And the author was not interested in doing any kind of will they, won't they, or like they just wanted it to be like a fated, these guys were beginning together from the beginning, which is dumb.
I got hyper Christian soccer mom vibes from this story really hard.
Yeah.
I very much think that the author may well be a staunch religious person. Again, maybe even more so than I keep wanting to call Brandon Sanderson Bryan Adams.
I'm not
Summer
sure
of
who that's more of
'69.
an insult. Definitely more of an insult to Bryan Adams.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely got kind of a conservative vibe from this, especially to kind of segue into the other popular thing we talk about, the violence, the lack thereof. I mean, there was fighting,
But it was like video game. That's not the right. It was
Saturday morning cartoon.
Yes.
Because like you the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, grew up watching it, loved them, right? How many people did Leonardo cut with his swords? All the episodes you watch, he had two big ass katanas, right?
Yeah,
How many
yeah.
people did he cut?
There was no. He
never cut a goddamn
he was never
person.
impaling anybody or anything. No.
And like you've got a pyromancer there, and they don't really seem to reckon with the danger of someone who can throw fire around. Like, even if he does have enough control of it, like, what happens when he gets knocked unconscious and there's fire burning that he was keeping under control? Which he does get knocked unconscious, but fortunately he hadn't started any out of control blazes at that point that I recall. And yeah.
Yeah, I could have added, and I will. Fuck it, we're going back. Magdown is Mad, Part 2. The names in these novels, and it again, it's kind of been universal across all the urban fantasy. Is some of the names are just they just suck. They're just bad. What was it, Lillian Pumpernickel. The final scene where, and I don't want to derail, but another thing that is endemic to these books is at the end they do like to your point, the Saturday morning cartoon thing where like the villain is in the room with the good guy, and even though what they should be doing is just doing the thing that they're going to do to be a bad guy, they instead sit there and let me tell you of my plans.
Yeah.
Really bad. But when that's happening, our main character has to, this isn't a joke, it's what has to be said. She goes, "What are you planning, Pumpernickel?"
Yeah.
And it's like, are you fucking kidding me?
Oh, can I rant for a second about the idea that Pumpernickel was somehow manipulating Cindy's whole life to get her to join the little merry band of misfits?
Yeah, bro, it's so bad.
Oh my god! So apparently do
you want to rant about that for a minute?
Absolutely. Because
you have more notes than normal. So
yes.
you were mad.
I was reading this. I was like, I cannot believe I've watched you for as long as I can remember, Cindy. It was hard not to. Your aura, your spark, you are a light in the darkness, a splendid beacon for all the lost and the damned. It was long ago that I saw your light through the window of a shack. It shone, even as your parents beat each other to death Fighting over a snort of fey dust, your light shone, beating back at the darkness, refusing to give in. Come on, man. Like,
And again, imagine that in a, a stage play or a movie, and that is F minus minus. The audience snickers at you.
yeah.
It's bad, bad, bad. And then, of course, there's the main character is the chosen one, so on and so. But the fact that he's just been, and there's no backstory given.
No.
He just picked her and decided, you know, decade plus manipulation campaign, go.
Yeah, there's even, I was there from the beginning, prodding, petting, experimenting. I've been with you longer than your deadbeat parents. A little godfather in the shadows pushing you towards this moment, ensuring that even the brightest light will burn out and leave this world the way it should be, its natural state. And it's funny you mentioned that this reads like, or this feels like it was written to be made into a movie, because the next line, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, my life flashed before me, every subtle nudge, every formative moment, everything could have been his fault, his doing. What the fuck is that passage? That says nothing. Because he could be lying. He could be full of shit here, but she's just saying, he nudged me into this position. Like, my first thought was that we don't know how long the Reckoning has been together. We don't know how long they've been operating, but it doesn't seem like they've been together a super long time.
No, I think they did at one point. She goes back and shows like some old photographs of them. In the story, I think they had been together a long time, but there's no.
So I think that they can only have been to. The reason why I say this is, like, Tom is like 20, 22, and supposedly he joined at like 17.
Yeah, so they've been together like 5 years plus.
Right. But they say in the beginning, or that they say that Lillian was good, was okay at the beginning, like earlier, like before.
Yes.
Sometime in the past, and that he's gotten worse and more corrupt, which doesn't jive with the idea that because the sequence of progression I got for Lillian was that he was one of those kind of guys who's like, we need to understand the light and the dark to fight it, and so he started studying the dark, and in this world, studying the dark is innately corruptive, and it will innately corrupt you and turn you evil. That seems to be the jive the vibe they're going for. So, with that in mind, how was he manipulating them if he was also just, within, say, the last 4 or 5 years, corrupted into the demonologist, demon summoner?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Also, I think I've been misgendering the author. I think it's a man.
Yeah, it is a man. Although it's a little weird because it's often not unfair to refer to the events of the book as being performed by a woman since they're first person. But
right.
Yeah. So often when we're saying she did it, we're referring to Cindy rather than the author. So I think that's a big, and also you mentioned pacing problems. I think that's a big part of it, is that the author didn't feel the need to slowly introduce things like you would in a normal story, because they were kind of just introducing situations and people and what have you that would have already been known to the audience.
Well, I didn't see anything that indicated that it was a prequel.
I only realized this by reading the afterword.
Yeah, and so I mean, like we do for any of the other books, I feel like we have to treat it as.
Yeah, I to be clear, I'm not saying that this is somehow exonerating or this is an explanation.
Right, not an excuse.
Right.
Yeah, the reveal at the end was painfully obvious. and as you said, the fact that he essentially had been manipulating her for her entire life was very unsatisfying. So, should we move into the magic system?
Yeah, because I think we can kind of segue from the way it ended into discussion of the magic
That's what
system.
I thought, yeah.
Because it ends with her staring into the demon's eyes and getting the demon's true name, which is only possible if you have enough mental fortitude to withstand the demon. So, of course, Cindy Mary Sue Giles has enough fortitude to withstand an archdemon and learn its true name, which is fine. I think that's a perfectly fine mechanic, perfectly fine way of getting that secret name. But then they say explicitly you need to do a banishing ritual with that true name to get them to leave. And the solution to doing a banishing ritual for an archdemon is for her to carve it into her skin. While I generally am a fan of tattoos, and I think that the kind of hinting at magical tattoos that they did a little bit and it was a little neat.
With brick.
Yeah. I think that the way it happened in the book was very slapdash and half-assed. And this definitely seems like, we've discussed this. This is a story with magic in it, as opposed to a story with a magic system.
Yeah, well, because there seems to be some loose rules, particularly with her spark.
There's wizards versus sorcerers, which is wizards have to use magic from way lines in the surrounding environment, or maybe carry some with them. And I assume there's some sort of talisman type way to store energy. And then sorcerers who have a spark innate to them.
Yep.
And the sparks seem to be sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, aspected or what have you, where they lean towards certain things. And
I got tabletop RPG vibes there with alignment.
yeah, it definitely seemed like,
And they were quasi sentient.
yeah, it reminded me of nothing so much as a sort of more restricted Mage the Ascension, which has as a mechanic in it, very briefly, Avatar, which mechanically represents your connection to your magical soul and determines how much of the magical mana system you can use. Again, very overview. Um,
Well, it's a lot like basically, I think what they wanted to do was the system from the Golden Compass, but that had already been done, so they did this instead.
Definitely to a certain point. But to continue my discussion of Avatar, in the thematic or narrative purpose of Avatar is it is your magical soul, and the more powerful your avatar is, um, the more of a separate person or character it can be, and that is something that can be used by good storytellers to enhance the story, because the avatar generally wants what's good for you, but it can also have its own agendas, and it definitely seems like at least Cindy's spark sort of has an agenda.
It certainly has a piety requirement.
Yeah, and I did think it was a little interesting how apparently her particular spark is like weakened by dirt, or she had has trouble around dirt, and I
Well,
thought,
she seemed like a sort of an OCD.
yeah, I wasn't
Uh,
super thrilled with the way they kind of did the OCD thing there in the beginning.
yeah, and it does come up a couple times throughout, but she's a germaphobe. I personally in my own writing I don't make a distinction between the words magic and sorcery. I use them interchangeably, but I I have no issue with the idea that you have one branch of magic users that are either drawing from the world around them or have arcane knowledge that allows them to spontaneously manifests magical power, and then another group that has an internal, in this case, a spark or some kind of an avatar or whatever that is a well of power that is unique to them. No problem with that's a cool system.
Yeah,
That
no.
could be that could easily be the system that would be used in a major blockbuster, big time, highly sophisticated epic fantasy series. No problem. Uh, in
I mean, let's
this
be honest
case,
here. This is how D&D works.
yeah, yeah,
Some people are born with magic, sorcerers, and others get it through other means.
yeah. And then you have like hard magic systems like Sanderson's, and then you have very soft, wonder based like Tolkien. And I would say that this type of a thing fits into that mold as a third archetype that's totally acceptable. It's one of the available moves. No quandaries there whatsoever.
Yeah.
But the application of it in this case just wasn't compelling.
No.
And it also wasn't clear if there was actually a distinction between the different types of magic users. I think a couple times they mentioned that the wizards have sparks as well.
Yeah, it wasn't super clear on that. My, gun to my head, tell me how it works. I would probably say that it's a world where anyone with the knowledge and will can learn magic, and that may somehow develop a spark. But people with an inborn spark are different, but they're still like using the same kinds of magic.
Yeah, and the spark seemed like it was capped. Like there was she could get better at understanding it.
I don't know that was true because
Well, at the end she just like unlocks a whole new power level.
yeah.
And it the way it was written didn't come off to me as though the spark had become more powerful as a result of her training and experience, but rather that because what she was doing was noble and that the spark agreed with her, it gave of itself more in the pursuit of manifesting its own sort of moral judgment on the scenario.
Right.
Obviously, she is the Christ-like, holy figure, and when the time
Literally
came,
a purifier.
yeah, and then when it came time to actually face, a major demon, suddenly the spark was willing to just go ahead and break the rule about, how much she could draw,
Right.
and so on and so forth.
But I do wonder because she meets the one Heilig Schlicht archmage or whatever, and near the end, and she's like, his power was so much more than mine, and I wondered if that was like a hint that she could grow her own power because she's talked about as being pretty powerful, but if she's getting dwarfed by this guy, then that means she's got room to grow.
Right.
So it does, the systems nerd in me is sitting here like, oh, interesting. So is that, and the power gamer in me is like, so does she need to like, is this Saiyan rules where she needs to run herself down to near burnout and then it grows back stronger? Does she need to do a bunch of how does this work? Which obviously they don't go into. They I don't think the author is remotely interested in systemizing that kind of thing, which is fine. That's their prerogative. They can be wrong.
Absolutely. I got the impression that if the spark is a weapon, it's already of a predetermined power level, but the individual does not begin being able to utilize that weapon's full potential. I did not get the impression that they were both leveling up as you went. She just happens to have a level 20 spark.
Right.
Max level, super powerful, 1 in a billion. She's the chosen one.
But she only has access to like level 5 abilities.
Right, because she has to grow as a person and become more acceptable to its
which again,
Judeo-Christian
that would be an amazing system in a game. Like you get more power by
in a tabletop. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean not necessarily having to be like all pure and nunnery like, but different ways of doing it. That would be an interesting way of doing it, instead of just you put points in your magic system. No, you have to throw a really good party that gets on the news or something, and that unlocks another level of your spark if you're a
Yes. Yeah.
you know
Yes, I could see that being enjoyable. For me, this triggered my dislike of. I don't have an issue with a person being born with special abilities, even abilities that are exceedingly rare or even unique. But when the power of the person and of the abilities should be a function of that person's training, experience, growth as a character, so on and so forth, not just it shouldn't just be a given that, one day you will be the greatest among us because you have the most powerful spark.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to fulfill that destiny. That is it is often used. It just isn't the type of system that I like.
Right.
Because I feel like that kind of a system leads you to prop up a lot of other stereotypes about class and gender and so on and so forth.
History is replete with fables and myths and stories of people who were prophesied to do great things and thus were given an easy life because of it, and thus bad things happened. I'm reminded of one particular, I think it was a Chinese fable I heard when I was young, where uh, a fortune teller comes to a family farm and stays there, and he gives a fortune for their son. They ask him to do a fortune for their son, and he says that if he works hard and stays with the farm and is a dutiful son, he will be a happy and successful farmer. But if he doesn't, then he will have a place of honor at the emperor's court. And so they don't make him work. They let him live a life of luxury, and he ends up getting turned into a statue and put in the emperor's court in a place of honor as a statue. So that kind of story, very common one in history. So I feel like doing an unironic, oh, you will be the best of us, and then they just get everything easy is kind of bad storytelling.
Yeah, it's just not to my taste. And again, it's another thing that seems to be endemic to the genre is the female lead character. I'm a badass, believe me. Uh, chosen one thing, and it is tiresome.
At least with Kate Daniels, her "I'm a badass" was kind of believable because she talked about how much training, and there was some inference about how she lived this badass warrior lifestyle.
Kate Daniels was the necromancer, right?
No, Kate Daniels was the Love Bites, Ilona Andrews.
Okay, yeah, I didn't dig that.
Yeah, and it had some other issues, but Deathmaker, the necromancer, she was this badass, and it was somewhat earned. Cindy leaves the convent where she's a surgeon and immediately falls in with an adventuring crew and is just like a solid member of the team with no issues.
Right. Well, we can do this in the opposite order to the list here. We may as well just talk about the pacing because we've teased it enough now, and I can't. I've got to talk about this because
by all means,
definitely the worst pacing out of any of the novels that we've read, with the exception the Way of Kings had the opposite problem. This is the worst in terms of moments of insane coincidence, really condensed narrative, chapter lengths that I think, and if you've been listening to the show, this is where you gasp. This is Magdalene. I'm going to say the chapters were too short, and they didn't follow a good arc. So each chapter it wasn't like a tiny self-contained short story in the way that you expect a chapter to be. And
each chapter was a scene like you'd see in a script or something. It was like in tabletop books, like modules or whatever. I've seen vampire mage campaign books where each chapter in the book is a scene to be played out.
Right.
Because scene is a mechanical thing, and that's kind of how this feels.
And I mean the names of the chapters. I hate that method.
Oh, you prefer just chapter 1, chapter 2?
If there's going to be a name, I don't want it to tell me what's going to happen in the chapter or be, transparently describing what's going to happen in the chapter.
Okay.
Again, that's totally personal taste. But in terms of the pacing, so she leaves the hospital nunnery thing, but doesn't technically leave. I thought she had kind of given that up, but then later on, randomly at the end, the dude just shows up and defrocks her.
It kind of seems like she snuck out.
Yeah, there was a weird, they tried to go out one night, and there was a curfew, and you're going, what? These are adults.
Yeah.
It was really weird.
Yeah, it was this weird, is this a school, a convent? I mean, it would make sense if it was a convent. I don't know. But when she left to join the group, it was well, did she quit? Up until they show up and rip her collar away, I thought she'd taken a leave of absence or, said, look, I can't go back. I don't want to do this anymore. She'd left in some capacity where they knew she wouldn't be. But then they come and took it away return or you are no longer a member of this family and this organization. It's well,
I thought that had already happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So it had no impact as a reader. And
when it was clearly supposed to, because it had a massive impact on her.
Yes. But of course this happens.
Told it had a massive impact.
But it was so close. It was they come in, this is the pacing. The guy comes in, kicks her out of the club, and then 30 pages later, he's giving it back.
Yeah.
And, she leaves, and then she ends up with this crew, and it's literally on one page, she's saying, oh, I just don't know, I need something to happen so I can prove myself. Next page,
oh my
here we go.
When I read that, I was like, are you kidding me? He's gonna... I was like, it's really only Brick whoever gets injured, and he can survive anything. I'm like, oh, so Brick's gonna get hurt. Oh, look, there, he just got hurt.
Yeah, it was really bad. And very often in the text, the author tells you what the character needs to have happen, and then it just immediately happens with nothing in between. And yeah, very strange.
Yeah. One minor nitpick. Did you grok that the Ash Demon was a unique demon before it was explicitly stated?
I guess I was assuming it was just some kind of a creature.
Because my impression for the first part of the book, until I actually have it highlighted, my impression for the first part of the book was that they were fighting demons, in general, and that some of the demons caused the wasting ash sickness. And
right.
then here it's chapter 17, so we are 62% of the way through the book, was the first time I caught, because they said explicitly, news of increasing attacks by the Ash Demon increased. And I actually made a note here, it was the Ash Demon is unique?
Yeah, I mean...
I don't know if that's...
Given all the other missteps in the narrative,
yeah.
That didn't really stick out to me. For me, the cardinal sin was when all is lost, and then Tom just goes full Deus Ex Machina. I'm a Voidwalker!
Yeah, that... Tom. Tom was a cool character until they turned him into the Deus Ex Machina.
That was really rough.
Yeah,
and then there is this phrase, the in-between, the realmless realm between realms.
Yes.
Yikes! How? How? Who writes that and goes, "Oh yeah,
There are people in love with the idea that there is some sort of extra dimension in the space between a doorway.
no,
Right.
fine." Again, this is like the magic system where,
Yeah.
I mean, my own writing is entirely based on there being a realm between worlds.
Right.
Fine, the concept is good, but the phraseology of the realmless realm between realms is awful.
Yes.
And again, it's so bad that the only thing that I can imagine is that there was a lack of honest editing that took place, because nobody in their right fucking mind would read that phrase and not highlight it and say, this needs to be changed. This is really bad. It hurts your story. It makes you seem like an idiot.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the author's a bad person. Doesn't
No.
even mean they're a bad writer. But that was a mistake that any reader should have immediately pointed out and said, this has to go. This is lowering the quality of your art.
Right.
And that, for me, that particular thing was just so egregious. I couldn't
Yeah.
get it out of my mind once I read it.
And did you read the? There was a sample chapter of the second book. I assume you just.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I went ahead and read it, and apparently he just. It's kind of implied in the first book here that him using it is difficult, and it's hard for him to hit the right target.
Right.
By the first chapter of the second book, he's using it like he's telefragging in Quake.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well,
know.
so, the pacing.
Yeah.
The pacing continues.
I mean, this book takes place over, what, 6 months, a year?
Is that the implication? Or is it explicit?
It's not explicit, but it definitely takes place over the course of months.
I guess I didn't think so. I thought that she kind of leaves the convent, basically joins that crew in the next couple days. They go on a couple missions, and then there's the main...
There's definitely weeks, and I think... Because I think there's talk about how she's been staying with Tom for a couple of months.
Okay, I can't confirm or deny.
Yeah.
I thought that the novel took place over a very short period of time.
No, and I think... I agree with you, the pacing is weird, because actually I think there's a bunch of time skips in there. Like, between chapters, there's time skips of weeks or months.
Fair enough.
Which also makes the lack of romance incredibly annoying. Because they're like, oh, you two lovebirds, or your boyfriend is in trouble, and it's like they haven't even kissed, let alone fucked. What are you talking about?
Well, again, if we're talking about like a really prudish Christian writer, I wouldn't be surprised if I think he kisses her on the cheek at one stage, that was supposed to be the romantic payoff.
Well, they kiss at the very end.
Do they?
Yeah, they when he rescues her from from Lillian's circle or whatever, she kisses him full on the mouth. It's this triumphant what's the term, culminating moment of that romance or whatever, and it was so chaste.
Okay, so I glossed it, I guess.
Yeah. It's...
And also there's I don't know if this is pacing so much as just, I guess, poor narrative, poor writing, but there's literally a passage that's like, the bite from the ash demon can't be cured by any normal or magical means. Skip 2 pages. I healed it!
Yeah.
Just bad.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nicholas. It's not hitting.
Yeah,
it just is what it is, man.
And I picked this book specifically because the protagonist was not a cop or bounty hunter or private investigator, And I guess Monster Hunter is fine as a protagonist. You know, they're ultimately they're not hunting down criminals. They're hunting down, you know, supernatural beings of destruction.
Right.
You know, that's fine. And I did actually kind of appreciate how they alluded to there being a lot of paperwork involved with that because, yeah, that kind of profession would involve a lot of paperwork if the world is anything like our modern world. You know, obviously.
Yeah, I thought that was a reasonable detail.
Yeah.
But yeah, the incurability and then immediately having the main character just be able to force it. And again, this is right after there's a whole sequence with the lesser demons where it's very much setting up a limiter on her power.
Mm-hmm.
And the space between that and the culmination of the novel is not enough time to have earned the breaking of that rule.
Right.
Nothing
She
changed.
needed to we needed another sequence of her in the surgery where she nearly burns herself out and then has to recover. You know, we needed a scene where she nearly burned herself out trying to uh, save Tom or Brick or something, and then she had to recover. We needed one or two more of those kind of scenes.
Or, training with
Yeah,
somebody from the organization that, maybe her friend even
right.
could tell her, oh, I've discovered this, or maybe
Yeah.
introduce the head of their order who ends up defrocking her later and having
Mm.
him teach her some stuff. And then there's a
Yeah.
conflict that emerges that culminates in the defrocking, and that could have served to actually reinforce her alignment with that organization so that we
Right.
cared, when it got stripped from her.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we said, like, that was literally, it was a nothing burger. It was like she had already left. We thought this was already done.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe we were supposed to believe that she had wanted to go back. I tell you, when I read that scene, what I thought was going to happen was he was taking her spark.
Yeah, I half
And
expected that to happen.
and that would have, again, that is another thing I hate when a character has a sword or an item or whatever, and then the story ends up being more about can they maintain possession of that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like that as a mechanism, but in this case, that would have been more interesting than what happened.
Yeah.
Then it would have been an issue. I thought maybe like her.
Or if she had been using her status to get information. Because she talks about how little she knows about demons and monsters and how she's having to learn all this stuff on the fly. Like, if they'd been like, well, I mean, I'm still in good standing as a purifier at Heiligschlick. I have access to their library. I can go look all this stuff up. Suddenly they lose access to that. That's um, a real loss. Something uh, that might be felt. Um, I keep getting reminded of the opening of Mass Effect 2, where, spoilers for a 15-year-old game, spoilers for the opening of a 15-year-old game. Uh, the first scene, the first sequence, is the ship you spent the entire first game flying around the galaxy in. And it's this awesome, state-of-the-art spaceship. Think like Ship from Knight Errant, only actually cool and not with an AI. So that gets destroyed in the first sequence of the game. And so you think, okay, so we're going to have to, you know, and then it goes with the main character being reborn and through science, stupid. Anyway, Mass Effect 2 is not a great game. But you start thinking, oh, so now I'm going to have these, like, shitty shuttles and I have to go around like that. And, like, 45 minutes, an hour into the game, you get a better ship based on the one that was destroyed in the first part of the game. And it's like, why did you take it away from me only to give it back 45 minutes later?
Right.
So it's the same thing with this, with her being a purifier of Heiligschlicht. You took it away when and in this case, like, as an audience member, I didn't even give a shit about it. about her being a member of Heiligschlicht.
No, and it doesn't seem to be the case that she has the intention of returning at any point. She's moved on to a different stage of her life. And again, she wasn't deriving any benefit from being affiliated with that organization.
Right.
And so it doesn't seem like we're going to get future novels where she goes back and she's just a surgeon.
No.
So, yeah, very hollow. It was not able to pull on my heartstrings in any measurable way.
No.
And yeah, the whole novel was it seemed like a lurching car, just and you're just kind of rambling from one plot point to the next, all right up next to each other.
It's lurching because it's on a tow rope and it's just being dragged from point to point that it needs to hit in order to get Cindy Giles from the point she's at the beginning of this book to when we first meet her in the Catverse books.
Right.
And that's the real problem, is that you can't do anything interesting with the world here. Or more accurately, obviously for us, we don't know what the world is like in the Catverse. So for all we know, this is a completely different world. Like, there's something that happens and that the big Catverse fans are like, oh, you don't get it. This is a completely different... Are stated...
Are there big Catverse fans?
A few.
Is that a...
The thread I found on Reddit was reasonably popular, and
Okay.
they said they were looking forward to it. But the problem with making a prequel like this is that you can't fundamentally change the world unless that fundamental change is important to the rest of the story. So ultimately, we have to get Cindy Giles from where she is, how Cindy becomes the character she apparently is in the Catverse, which I think is breaking one of the rules we talked about with, we've talked about with multiple books. Is this the most interesting day in your character's life? No. Why are we getting this story instead of that one? And the answer is that we've probably already gotten those stories in the Catverse, so now we're getting the less interesting stories that led up to that story in the Catverse. And I think that's a big reason for a lot of the weird characterization, weird pacing, is that ultimately this is a story that has very, very big limits on what it can change about the characters in the world.
I guess this is as good a time as any to jump into the world building itself. I found that the world that was constructed at the very beginning of the book, I thought had promise. The idea of a relatively modern city, a poorly named city, wasn't called like Hopeville?
Hope City.
Hope
yes.
City. So you have this city with this kind of nunnery-based anti-demon, anti-monster organization, and then also there's the kind of like an upper city and a slums where debauchery occurs, and then there's the ley line system going on, and then you have the people that have the sparks, and then you have the regular wizards, and there are rifts that pop up and shit out monsters that then you have the kind of ordained knights that go and fight them, but there are also just your city slicker kind of off the grid monster hunter types that also go and fight that stuff. I thought there was a lot of scope there where you could pick one part of that and go really far into it and make these kind of really this big sprawling epic story.
Right.
And then we just didn't get that. So I actually thought the world building was the strongest part of the story.
What did you make of the idea that if a way line doesn't have a way to, and I wasn't super clear about if it needed a natural, essentially it was that if the way line didn't have an outlet, it would stagnate and corrupt, which implies to me that probably most way lines are going to end up getting corrupted, because it wasn't super clear to me how that worked, how the slums were this dark, corrupted place, not because a bunch of dark magic was done there, but just because the Wayline didn't have a fresh supply of mana like the one in Cape Town did.
Right, because there was the Titan,
Yeah.
which I wasn't super clear on what that was.
I'm going to go ahead and assume it was a Greek Titanomachy Titan. Just sure, why not?
Okay. I'll buy it.
They don't say anything else about it other than it's sleeping and that they have to maintain the ritual to keep it asleep so that it doesn't destroy the city.
Well, yeah, and I thought that with the ley line system, even though it had some areas that I wasn't clear about, I thought maybe we were being set up for some kind of a more sophisticated class critique, and that doesn't really happen either.
If there is any critique of class, it's that the lower class are scum and corrupt things around them.
Right.
Because that seems to be what happened. And the idea that there are people freeze drying and grinding up fairies.
Yeah, that seemed to me, again, I don't know the reality of this, but that came off to me like someone who is very prudish about drug use in our real world, sort of wanting to make crackheads or cokeheads in their story.
Yeah.
And just kind of slapping the fairy thing on top of it and saying like, well, if you do drugs, you'll beat the shit out of each other. And
yeah, and that effect, that fact that it was that they were beating the shit out of each other because they believed the other one was hiding a stash from the other, which, I mean, that's believable for addicts to accuse other addicts of hiding. Yeah, and especially when fairy dust is just like super common as a fantasy trope. That, sure, fairy dust gets you high. Why not?
yeah, why wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Why do you have to grind up fairies? Like, that's one of those things that is, like you said, it's the prudish attitude towards drugs, because, well, these degenerates just want to get high, so of course they dry up.
Well, yeah, that was the thing, is that the places where the magic is clean and where you're able to do good works are, associated with this order and with the, like we've said, kind of like a nunnery, priesthood type situation. And then the more degenerate, in quotes, that the behavior of people is, the more likely it is that demons show up and
right,
so on and so forth.
And also apparently it at least it weakens purifiers, or at least it weakens Cindy to be in those corrupted areas. Like, just the very presence weakens her, makes it difficult for her to perform magic. And it's heavily implied that Lillian carries the scent of corrupted magic, because she says that she smells him before he comes in, but no, there's not really any other discussion about his smell. And it's like, I don't understand how purifiers are able to fight if being around corruption weakens them like that, unless that's just a Cindy thing and she's just too pure for the corrupted area.
Well, I mean, it's in the title of the book. And she even, another thing that I absolutely hate is when you name your book something and then eventually the character starts saying the name of the book. She is this chaste, beacon of holy energy.
Yeah.
And it weakens her to be around anything that is demonic. Again, it comes off to me like a fantasy story written by a Christian with the idea of this is a fantasy story that Christians can read.
Right. And the idea that corruption weakens purity like that has always been an issue to me, because it implies that corruption is stronger, ignoring the whole Christian aspect of it. If we're talking purely absent any moral, if you've got if you've got corrupted magic that can only do like harm and necromancy and summoning demons, and then you've got pure magic that can heal and create life and that kind of thing, like absent the Christian overtones. If you've got a situation where being in the presence of corruption weakens the purifier, that means the corruption is stronger, and so the purity. I can't articulate why I don't like that worldview, because it basically is saying that purity has to be individually stronger than corruption to overcome it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a taste
Yeah.
thing, because I mean, even in Tolkien, normally it's fear that is created by, for example, the Nine Riders and the Witch King. Their mere presence will seep the hope and ability to withstand from.
Maybe that's just better because, fear and hope are more. Putting those actual human emotions to them gives it more of a believable element than just purity and corruption.
Well, but even in Tolkien, it he uses the word fear, but I mean, ultimately you have the Witch King that's all black, and then you literally have Gandalf the White, and
Right.
they do face off at one point. Gandalf gets dehorsed, so on and so forth. It is very much a, uh, I don't want to get attacked by the Tolkien heads, so I won't say that it's
We
direct.
already pissed off the Brandon Sanderson fans, so.
Right. Well, so I won't say that it's pure like Christian allegory, but it's clearly, coming from a Judeo-Christian understanding of good and evil. Like that's the way that goes, and so to a lesser extent.
Wasn't Tolkien like best friends with C.S. Lewis?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
So unsurprising.
Yeah.
But I can understand why that's not to your taste.
Mm-hmm.
Some people must like that.
Yeah.
Mechanic. But yeah, I mean, ultimately we could just keep, bashing on it. But
there are definitely plenty more nits to pick, but ultimately this is just. It's like what Hank Hill said about Christian rock. You're not making Christian music better, you're making rock and roll worse. And when you bring these all but explicitly Christian themes into urban fantasy, you're not making Christianity better, you're making the urban fantasy worse.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I didn't enjoy the book, and there's just not a lot to draw from to have any kind of discussion that isn't just us saying this is why we didn't like this part of it.
Yeah.
Move on and talk about the next thing about it that we didn't like. There were, unfortunately for me, very few, if any, redeeming qualities. Like I said, with the only exception maybe being that the initial world building framework from the first couple chapters seemed like it had the potential to be very interesting. Or allow it to contain some more sophisticated critique, but that is not at all the way that the author chose to go about it.
I might check out the mainline Catverse books to see what those are like, if they're better in a world that can be more dynamic.
Okay, well, would it be worth it for us to do our first actual follow-up episode where we investigate, is this just a prequel that we didn't like and that was written at a lower standard than this author's main output?
I'm wondering if the major problem with this is prequelitis.
And you think maybe there's a possibility that just everything is at a higher, they had more money, a bigger publishing deal, more oversight, better editing, a longer writing process, more attention to detail in the dialogue, a more inspired story.
And it's entirely possible that we read that and we find that we don't. But yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and go with your choice next, if you want. But
yes, so was it better than Knight Errant?
Oh. I think I'm going to go with no, simply because Christianity absent the fascism is preferable to fascism absent the Christianity, and Knight Errant had both. So, yeah, I'm going to say this is still not as bad as Knight Errant.
Not as bad as Knight Errant. All right, so it squeaks by.
Now, is it as bad as For Love of Magic? Which we decided was worse than...
No, you know what? This one did not have as much material in it that I was just aghast, where I took the book away from my face and had to just sit there and go, I can't believe that they just did that. The only exception that really comes to mind is the realmless realm between realms line, and maybe one or two other instances where I was like, okay, that's really bad, but this was more at a holistic level. It just wasn't to my taste.
Right.
Whereas, and I would say I think this is a mediocre book.
Yeah.
Maybe I wouldn't go as far as to say it sucks entirely, or that it's a wholly bad.
I think we agreed that the world was interesting.
Yeah, that's...
Or had a lot of interesting aspects.
We're talking about this novel about
pure power. Yeah.
I think For Love of Magic, it was just a bad book.
Yeah.
All around. I felt like if it was a game on Steam, I would have refunded it. type feeling.
Yeah.
So next time we will be reading The Ever King by L.J. Andrews, which is the pirate book that I thought we were reading in our last episode.
Right.
And so I'm very excited. It has a huge number of positive reviews on Amazon. It was a #1 bestseller, and it's relatively recent, I believe. I think it came out last year.
Yeah.
If not, it's an ongoing series.
I think I saw it came out in August, and because the audiobook just came out, that's why we're doing this now. We were going to do this in place of our last story, but since I mostly listened to the audiobook, we decided to delay it until the audiobook came out. It just came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so we are... I think it was that this one had come out in August, and the next one is forthcoming.
Right.
And so... yeah, I'm excited for that, and I hope that you will join us then. As always, for Pope Jupiter, I'm Raymond Magdalene, and we will see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at Staff Trenchcoat. Look for us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to shoot us an email at staffandtrenchcoat@gmail.com if you have a book recommendation, and we hope to see you in the next episode.